Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Hot Path Show. I'm Johnny, joined by Tobias. Welcome in, Tobias. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, except for crashing computer and new computer. I'm doing awesome.
Yeah, we got all kinds of tech issues and crazy scheduling things going on. But anyways, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about dots and Unity ECS and cool data-oriented design things. So anyways, we have an exciting show for you planned today. And, the main topic is going to be, Tobias, you're going to be sharing some things with you. So why don't you give us a little bit of introduction onto what you're going to be sharing today?
Yeah, so Singleton, as old as time, I feel like there's so many things around Singleton, and there's so many patterns in old Unity or game object world Unity, and I'm going to be talking about how I at least have approached this problem quite successfully in my own game with Singletons in ECS. So show all of the tricks and things I've learned for 5 years with the same solution.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, singletons are an important concept, I would say, because there's oftentimes a lot of global data and things that we need to access. So it's very helpful for us in game development to use singletons. So yeah, very much looking forward to some of the tips and tricks that you've made, and so we'll be excited for that a little bit later on in the show. So anyways, before we start getting into some of the main things here, I do want to bring up a couple of miscellaneous announcements. So first and foremost, you may or may not notice, depending on how well this goes, we're actually not live right now. So typically we do this show live every Friday at 1 p.m., 1 p.m. Pacific time. However, there was a little bit of a scheduling conflict that we had, so we're actually pre-recording this the day before, and then hopefully using our streaming software, we kind of have this still in a live stream format. So I am going to be available in the chat, just hanging out. So if you guys have any questions throughout the show, feel free to go ahead and ask them, and I'll go ahead and do my best to answer them. Also, by the way, because Tobias is taking care of the main topic, if you do have any questions for him that maybe I can't answer kind of during the show, then we can kind of have those queued up. And Tobias is going to be on the show next week, so we can ask the questions to him next week. So again, feel free to just continue to hang out and chat as normal. I'm going to be hanging out with everybody. We'll see how this goes. It's going to be a little bit of a fun experiment. So anyways, another exciting thing that we have going on is our first community event. So I think one of the things that I wanted to do when I started this whole initiative of the Hot Path show and everything like that is I wanted to start getting more kind of community focused events going. And so the first community event, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but I do just want to announce that it's going to be happening from March 8th to March 18th. So I'm going to be announcing basically what the, sort of goal of the community event is on not this next week's show, but the show after, again, on March 8th. And then you'll have basically that weekend, a full week, and then another weekend to complete the community event. So it's going to be kind of along the lines of like a hackathon, not necessarily like a full game jam. What I wanted this to be is kind of a more or less low commitment thing that you can do just kind of on the side, in between, when you have some, free time after work or something like that, where it, shouldn't take you all that long a time, but, I still think it's going to be an interesting challenge. And I think this is going to be great for, people who have no Unity ECS experience at all, or very little, and you want to maybe, push yourself to create a little bit of a project using Unity ECS. And this can also be a really fun exercise for more advanced users who have been using it for a while and want to experiment with some different ways that you can use Unity dots. So again, very much looking forward to this. And so yeah, stay tuned on March 8th, where I'm going to be basically announcing all the details of that. I should, by the time that this live stream goes live, I should have the itch.io page all set up for it. So I'll have some links down in the chat or description where you can actually kind of go ahead and sign up for this community focused event. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So we can go ahead and just real quickly want to bring up some of the Patreon bonuses. So of course you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/turbomakesgames. So thank you very much to our supporters over there. I did just put up a bonus episode yesterday about how I would make Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 using Unity dots. So this is just kind of a fun little video that I created. Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. And, every once in a while, every couple years, I just kind of get that itch to play the game again. So I've kind of been in that mode lately. So what I did in this one is just kind of showed off one of the parks that I had created and just talked about a bunch of the main systems that are in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 and kind of generally how I would implement them with Unity dots. So I do think it's a very fun video, and that video is available to Patreon supporters at all tiers. So if you are a Patreon supporter, you can go ahead and enjoy that video now.
I just remember one thing that I think there's if you heard about the YouTube channel No Clip, which does like documentaries about. They made a big documentary about it where they talked about Tom Sawyer, the maker. I think
Chris Sawyer.
Chris Sawyer, yeah. And you probably already seen it, but for the viewers, if you have not seen that documentary, it's not super programming focused, but it's really, really fascinating still to listen to what somebody in the 90s did by himself. It's just insane. It's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, it is really amazing. And shout out to Chris Sawyer. He basically made I think 90% of the code base in that game is like just regular straight x86 assembly. Which is very impressive. And that's, one of the, OG data oriented performance aware programming where, you're just literally just, coding right to the metal. I'm sure there are all kinds of crazy things that he was doing in there to squeeze every little bit of performance out of those old machines. Because even on contemporary machines at the time, the game ran fantastic, even with thousands of guests and all these roller coasters and rides and everything like that. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I ran it on my mom's work computer. I was 10 or 11 years old when I had it, and she had a ThinkPad, and I just played it normally. And it was only 15 years later when I learned to program that I was really starting to appreciate oh my god, that's insane.
Exactly.
that worked.
I never would have known.
I did. I never realized when I was playing it that's just crazy that it works so well that it does, because that old ThinkPad, it was a potato basically. So
and anyways, then talking about some upcoming relevant perks, I do just want to say that the first Q&A episode, I'm going to be recording that within the next couple of days here for the people at the L1 cash support level and up. So I do have a post over on Patreon if you are at that support tier and up, that you can go ahead and just drop any questions on there. I do see that we only have one question so far. So if we don't end up with a bunch of questions, I have an idea about how to make that episode a fun one anyways. So but if you are at the L1 support tier and up, feel free to go ahead and check that out, because I do want to go ahead and record that Q&A within the next couple of days here to get that out for you. So anyways, with some of those miscellaneous announcements out of the way, we can go ahead and get into our prefetch, which is our warm-up topic of the day. So our warm-up topic of the day is actually going to be GDC, the Game Developers Conference. Because I did see that Unity actually recently put up their schedule for GDC, where they're going to be, they have a Unity Developer Summit going on, where they just have, a bunch of talks related to, upcoming features and released features and talking about all kinds of different things in here. So if you do want to check out this schedule yourself, you can just go to the GDC website. Under conference, there is the session viewer, and that'll basically bring you to this page here. Now GDC has hundreds of sessions going on, so you kind of got to filter it down so you find what you're looking for. Of course, there's a search thing, but if you just type in Unity, well, you get all the Unity talks, but you also get all the talks that have community in the title, because Unity is part of the word community. So that's fun. So what I typically do is you can scroll down and then under format, if you just check mark the sponsored developer summit, then that pretty much gives you all the Unity talks. There are a couple other developer summits from Google and Meta, which actually have some kind of interesting talks that I might be attending. So yeah, I do plan on attending GDC this year. By the way, the nice thing about these sponsored talks is you can get into the talks at any pass level. So if you just have, the base Expo pass or, Core Pass, Summit Pass, or whatever, you can get into the Unity Developer Summit. So you don't have to pay for the $2,000 all access pass or anything like that. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, the roadmap session. So this is kind of the first section that they're doing Monday morning, which is just kind of it's called Unity 6 and Beyond, a roadmap of Unity engine and services presented by Unity. So of course you can go ahead and read the full description, and they talk about some of the things that they are going to be discussing in this, and you can kind of read through and you can see that they were talking about things related to the render pipeline, shader and VFX graph, some of their AI tools, because that's something that they're putting a lot more kind of focus on. Interesting that they also call out some of the multiplayer center and multiplayer tools, because they're kind of putting more focus onto their own out of the box multiplayer tools, which I think in general is a good thing. And of course the whole services division, which they're putting a lot of resources towards as well. So as far as dots go, I just want to kind of bring this up here. The only thing that's really mentioned about dots and ECS in this whole thing is it says, while Unity 2022 LTS had a great focus on performance with dots, see how Unity 6 adds to that with huge leaps in graphical fidelity and many more advances to come. So I kind of take this as there's probably not going to be a whole lot of dots specific things in the roadmap talk. It sounds like most of the things that they are going to be focusing on is just kind of, especially things along the lines of graphics fidelity, again, multiplayer features, AI, stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm taking of it. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that there, Tobias?
Yeah, I mean, there is some dots feature that people have been asking for a while, and maybe they are not in the chamber all yet in Unity 6, which is kind of sad. But I think part of it is like we have a solid foundation for most of the dots things. Maybe they're like, let's build more advanced stuff on top of it and make sure that we are keeping equal pace with some other industry giants doing cool stuff, and we need to be doing similar cool stuff. That would be my sort of way of looking at it. I don't know.
Yeah, and definitely. And we're going to be talking about some kind of upcoming dots features a little bit later, but I do agree that in general that dots is decently featured right now, but I think that there are certainly a bunch of bugs, especially when it comes to like editor bugs and usability things that ideally I would like to kind of see cleaned up and be a little bit more polished, so things are just a little bit more pleasant to work with, I guess, especially when we get into things like using netcode for entities, just because there are kind of some just interesting quirks and stuff in there. So I would like to see a lot of those things kind of get ironed out. So, I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily looking for any crazy new features. Of course, there's, one feature that I think everyone would like to have. I think the one that you were kind of hinting at was dots animation, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the one, the elephant in the room has been for 3 years.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe we get a little teaser on that during this show, but I think that would be pretty cool. Anyways, that's kind of the main roadmap. Do you have any other kind of thoughts on the roadmap stuff?
No, I'm just happy that they are, doing strides forward and not being lazy, I guess. It looks with the words "huge leaps in graphic fidelity." I hope they're not overhyping it, but probably it's going to be some really impressive stuff. And that's graphics tech is always very fun to see worked on and get new fun toys to play with.
Yeah, Well, yeah, if you're interested in graphics tech, then Unity has a ton of things for you as far as sessions go. Like if you could just kind of look through some of the sessions. So the one immediately after the roadmap session is going to be called "Reach a New Level of Performance and Rendering with Unity 6." Moving on, you have create eye-catching 2D art with lighting effects and techniques, high fidelity graphics on mobile, creating beautiful natural environments with Unity and SpeedTree, customize your renderer, best practices for building successful web games. So yeah, the ton of
There's a lot.
graphics things, 20 productivity hacks in Unity. I think that could be an interesting one as well. Let's see, Unity Developer Summit Multiplayer 101 development with our Mega City Metro sample. Kind of getting into some of the multiplayer things. Unity Muse accelerating prototyping and the Unity editor with AI. Developer Summit drive better gameplay experiences on Unity or on user devices with AI. So again, a couple more AI talks, and then talking about game monetization. So yeah, those are kind of the main ones. Again, you see that there are a lot of ones related to rendering, some multiplayer stuff, a couple AI talks. The one that I skipped over because it's the one that's most relevant to this show is this one here, which is the Unity Developer Summit, the Great Data Bake-Off, Improving Performance with Dots Baking. So I thought this was really interesting. They do have one specific talk on dots. It's a 30-minute talk. And this is happening Tuesday afternoon. I guess the idea with this one is, I'll just go ahead and read this full thing off here. So it says, attend this session to see how you can maximize your game's performance using specialized features of Unity's data-oriented technology stack, DOTS. This includes baking, a crucial process that converts scene data into entities and components. You also learn how to benefit from configurable components, custom allocators, and other features that help you with performance optimization, more efficient memory utilization, and effective debugging. So definitely, I'm going to be at this talk for sure. But yeah, it's really interesting that they the one dots talk that they're doing is specifically on baking. So it'll be interesting to see if they have, anything new on baking that maybe we haven't seen before, or if they're just kind of giving us some better insight into kind of being, I guess just using baking to its kind of, full potential. Do you have any kind of thoughts in general on this?
Yeah, I have one. This is total speculation. So I guess both you and me maybe have not that experience because we're not working big enough project content-wise to see a baking issue, baking performance issue. But I know that there was a lot of issues in V-Rising with a lot of issues. It was just slow and just a lot of tedious loading times all over the place.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know how they managed after upgrading to DOTS 1.0 and forward, but maybe I know they obviously been in deep, tight talks with Stanlock about their work progress and the work pipelines.
Right.
Because in V-Rising and Stanlock is one of the first purely very, very much dots focused type of game of that scale. So maybe this is like, the baking thing doesn't really hold up when you put as much stuff into it as V-Rising is. So we're going to speed it up, and maybe this is something, but probably not that specific, but it could be a contributing factor.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the cool things that Unity does is they work very closely with a lot of their, power users and people like that, and like just get some like good insight into some of the issues that they're having, see how people are kind of working around that, and they really kind of take that feedback into account to, make a better product overall. So I definitely think it's a good idea that Unity does that. And I guess you can kind of think of it as like, almost like what NASA does, where they create all these like really, crazy nice inventions for people up on the space station. And then, we just kind of, regular people end up seeing, benefits from some of that technology. Like, for example, I think like Velcro is just one of the classic examples of something that was originally like, had a purpose in the International Space Station. And of course, this is, widely used everywhere now. So
yeah, it trickles down from the places where it's actually required to even make it work.
exactly.
Yeah. So that was just that's what I thought about first. I remember Zek, one of the programmers at Stunlock, showing me the time it took to like reload the prefab and change something in a prefab in re-rising. This was long ago, like 2.5-3 years ago. And it was a lot of loading screens, and I was like, baking needs some work maybe on large scale projects, but I don't know how it is after 1.0. This was in 0.17, so it might have been completely different now.
Right. Yeah.
So
that is really interesting. I'm very much looking forward to this talk, of course. I don't think it says, it doesn't say who is giving the talk yet, but that'll be interesting to see. And so again, this is available to anyone who has the, Expo Pass or anything like that. Last thing that I wanted to bring up, which was GDC related, which is another talk. This is not a Unity talk. It's not a sponsored talk. So you do need to have either the All Access Pass or the Core Pass to get into this. So unfortunately, I think I'm just doing the regular Expo Pass this year, so I don't think I'll be able to get into this talk, but this one's called ECS in Practice, the Case Board of Alan Wake 2. So I think this will be a very interesting talk. Hopefully this gets onto the GDC Vault at some point. It's talking about the recently released game Alan Wake 2 by Remedy Entertainment. And so this says they're using a new data-oriented ECS gameplay framework instead of the previous object-oriented one. So as a result, we have performance gains such as cache coherency, multi-threading out of the box. Looks like they're using some C++ features. This is kind of more of a custom-built ECS framework as opposed to using one like Unity's. So it would be really interesting to see, kind of how they tackled some of these problems that they did. It does show in here that they said they'll showcase the interaction between C++ code and Lua scripts. I think there's kind of some interesting things here. I guess they're going to be going into the case board where they use objects and components. I haven't played this game, so I'm not super familiar with the case board here. But I think that'll be another very interesting talk to just kind of, see how other people are doing data-oriented things.
Yeah. I would watch that if I get access to it at some point.
Yeah. So anyways, I think that's about all I have to say on GDC. So I am going to be attending. Again, it's going to be happening, March 18th through the 22nd. Yep, it says right here. I will be there. And if anyone else is going to be there, feel free to let me know. And maybe we can meet up and say hello at some point. That is our Prefetch warm-up topic. Unless you have anything else to say on GDC. You going to be there?
No, I have a game that's releasing. I can't take that time.
And that's also big flight and everything.
Yeah.
And
one day.
Next year.
Let's hope.
Next year you'll be there to show your game off.
Yes.
So anyways, we're going to next go into the context switch, where I do want to talk about the Unity Dots roadmap. So I did kind of briefly mention that we're going to be talking about some of the upcoming features to Unity Dots. So I'll go ahead and again post this link in the chat as well as the description of the video. You can get to this at, Unity has a bunch of different roadmaps available on their website. If you just search for Dots roadmap on Google, you can get to this pretty easily. But basically this has kind of like, existing features that they have in right now. So ECS for Unity is in 2022 LTS. They're talking about streamlining some ECS workflows, compatibility with game objects, netcode, physics, and, having some samples and onboarding. So these things are kind of like already in Unity ECS right now. And then kind of scrolling down, it talks about some of the things that they have in progress and other things that are kind of under consideration. So right now, the ones that they have in progress are consolidation of ECS architecture and tooling, debugging tools, ECS-based animation, which we talked about already. And
Getting
then large scale simulation sample. So these are kind of the ones that they are basically said that they're in progress right now. If you click on these, unfortunately, most of these haven't been updated for a while. So this one actually hasn't been updated since January 2022 for the ECS based animation. So, again, hopefully we hear something on that soon. The other ones, I believe these ones are all updated in December of 2022. So a little over a year ago for the in progress ones. So, not a whole lot of, updating. It would be nice to see maybe a more recent update on a couple of these things here. But just as far as any of these in progress ones, are there any ones that kind of really stick out to you? Some things that, you would like to really use and all that?
Well, I mean, besides animation, well, I've gone around that in a few ways that's pretty satisfactory to me right now. Otherwise, debugging tools, that's the one, because I built a ton of custom tooling, when editor stuff for my game to be able to handle these things that, it's in some manner solved in old game object world, and it doesn't really, and it's not solved in ECS, and I've sort of made exactly what I need to make it happen. Like, for example, before, I don't know which version added it, but at some point earlier, you could not press mesh in the scene editor and get the ECS data of that object. Like you can with any game object. That was not available, maybe 0.17 or something, and then maybe later than that, it came. They added it. It's now there. But when we were working on the early prototype of the game, it was very hard to understand something was going wrong in the world, because you couldn't locate it. That if you just had like the ID or whatever. So I made like a editor tool where you could sort of select somehow a entity, and the scene camera flew over and focused on it and paused the execution.
Okay.
That was the only way I could really make it work, so I could actually understand when stuff didn't work properly. So that's one of those cases, and maybe I have like at least like 20 different custom specifically made codes, maybe like 10 to, some of them are just 10 lines of code, some of them are like thousands of lines of code that just are to be able to debug ECS stuff, and half of them are obsolete by now because they actually added stuff.
No, they have.
So I'm most looking forward to debugging tools, because I don't know, I think we sometimes forget that like visualizing the problem is maybe the most important part about debugging.
Totally.
So just reading the code or trying it over and over again and with logs and whatever is often a bad idea. So anything to be able to visualize it better, I'm excited to see what they have.
Yeah, totally. And maybe if you're willing to share any of your debugging tools, it would be cool to go into a couple of those on a future episode.
Yeah, for sure. That's no problem at all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think debugging tools are definitely great. I do think, some of the ones that Unity has right now are okay. Although I've kind of been, unfortunately, having some bugs with the debugging tools. I noticed that recently in, I'm using the 1.2 pre-release for a lot of the things that I've been just kind of experimenting with on my own.
Yeah.
The archetypes window literally just doesn't work in 1.2 for whatever reason. So the archetypes window, it basically shows you, all the different archetypes in your world, and you can go ahead and go through those and click on those. And it is a really helpful window because it gives you good information about, how much what the memory footprint is per entity, how many entities can fit in a chunk, how many chunks are you actually allocating. So it does give you a lot of really good insights into your memory usage and all that. However, for whatever reason in 1.2 it just doesn't load. And I tested a project on 1.0 and I was able to open it up and kind of go through those. And it would be nice to just kind of have some improvements to those because again, in that archetypes window, like it does look like there's like an editable field where you can like say change the name of the archetype, or you can say like, oh, this is the player archetype. But that doesn't seem to really stick around. So not really
Yeah.
sure, what the use of that is. But yeah, it would be nice for us to kind of like, be able to custom name archetypes. So, we don't have to go through like remember, that this hex code matches to this archetype or whatever. So
Yeah. Hopefully they have worked on those. I have similar issues.
yeah. And then, yeah, it would be interesting to see what this large scale simulation sample is all about, where it says there's thousands of rigid bodies and physics colliders interacting in a performance matter. So it would be really interesting to see how they kind of accomplish this. And yeah, it seems like it hasn't been updated since December of 2022. But yeah, maybe we'll see some of these things at GDC.
Yeah, let's hope.
And then so as far as things that are kind of under consideration, so we can kind of talk about these and really just kind of talk more generally about, things that we would want from Unity ECS. World building tools is one of them, where they kind of have some of the terrain tools and using dots as a foundation to make, more performant world building tools. I think this kind of lines up with what Unity is trying to do about, the way that they're kind of marketing it is, Unity Dots empowers you to create more ambitious games. So kind of having like some good, high performance world building tools would be really nice. ECS based mesh deformations. So again, this kind of ties in pretty closely with the animation stuff. So, being actually able to like, deformed skin mesh to have, good animations for like humanoid characters, animals, things like that.
I just gotta point out on that one, like I've been experimenting with a few of their mesh modification. Well, it's really like, can you modify mesh data without using managed memory? That's what it's all about. ECS or not, it's like, how do we make it burstable? Is more of the most relevant thing there. And I'm very curious to where they're going, because right now you have the mesh array object that you can pull out from somewhere.
Right.
You can get the mesh out as a pure data object, or non-managed object, and you can play around with it. But I feel like this is they need to probably rewrite some deep down Unity C++ code to be able to do this in a way that's not like a random half-baked appendix on top of something else. I don't know, maybe I'm over analyzing, but I was a little bit disappointed when I tried to do that, because I have an enemy in my game where I need to rebuild the mesh, all of the like every frame from scratch. And I ended up doing it old school ways and not using burstable code, and just doing it with managed code, because it was just not possible to do it in a reasonable way. Yeah. So, but let's hope that they are doing something nice, and then maybe maybe ripping some parts of the old engine out to replace it with something more burstable. Who knows?
Right. So yeah, next up is burst determinism. So being able to have deterministic code run across, different CPU types and everything like that, as far as kind of what I understand. And I think a lot of this burst determinism also goes into having like, actual deterministic physics, from the Dots physics engine against, again, different platforms and everything like that. Because a lot of that kind of core math is kind of built off of this requirement of bursted determinism.
Yeah, and I think part of it also that you get a lot of speed. Well, maybe I don't know actually how much, but you supposedly get a lot of speed from float arithmetics fast mode, or whatever it's called. You can like ask the compiler to compile your burst code into a version that uses slightly less precise float arithmetics, and maybe they just like, we don't support that. If you have fast mode enabled, you can't do it. You can't do it deterministically, or maybe that's part of the problem. And like they want to have the super fast bursted.
Like, yeah, they want to have the fast mode, but different CPU architectures are
Yeah,
going to
I don't.
kind of quantize the numbers differently.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it just
I
leads to
don't
these
know.
very slight errors that can add up over time.
I just know that fast float mode is something that matters for speed, and I know it's not deterministic at all at the moment. I think that last part I'm not sure of, but I think I read something in the forum like half a year or a year ago.
To be honest, I didn't even know. I don't even think I knew that there was like a fast float mode that was like kind of separate, like a separate thing.
So people don't like go off and try to, well, you can, I guess, but I experimented with a lot of the specific things around burst, because there's more options than you realize. There's so many intrinsics where you can like instruct your CPU to do very specific things which are not even supported, and that is sort of the same domain as the burst settings. And from my experiments, like maybe 1.5 years ago, there were basically no performance gain I could squeeze out of it by trying different stuff. So I think you need to level up your low level understanding of your computer a pretty substantial amount before you can actually take advantage of this stuff. And I think that burst default mode is probably the best one to use. It's probably default for a reason.
Yeah. No, that is the cool thing about burst, is because like, performance by default.
Yeah.
It's you basically just kind of like enable burst, and as long as you kind of fit the kind of general rules and you're not doing anything like really dumb, then you can get some really good performance gains out of it. And of course it does give you the option to do really crazy in-depth things if you actually know what you're doing, but if you don't, then you can still take advantage of amazing performance benefits from it. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
Next up is improvements to ECS content management. This one is one that I'm definitely looking forward to, because that is kind of one certainly pain points about being able to spawn assets and kind of maybe interact with things like scriptable objects, just kind of like really good Unity features that we've been used to. There isn't necessarily a good way to do that from a purely ECS side. So we kind of end up having to maybe do things on the game object side, or, build our own kind of essentially like content management setup where we can, kind of have access to the things that we need to at runtime. It would be nice to see Unity kind of make their own out-of-the-box solution that gives us a better way to do content management and everything like that. Has that been a particular pain point for you in your game? Because of course you're working with a lot of assets and things like that.
Yeah, it's been a pain point, but I just built my own solution, and since I don't have a lot of requirements on me, like my solution can be pretty straightforward and not that complex, and then I'm not too annoyed by it, and it works pretty good, and it worked for 4.5 years basically the same way. So when the baking became a requirement, when you couldn't do live conversions anymore in 1.0 or whatever it was, I had to rebuild it to make proper baking work. That's the only thing that was very annoying to me. Otherwise, I had no reason to have baked things. I still don't really have because there's
just because you're just circumnavigating that do your own thing basically.
Yeah. But I'm also excited about that. But for just read instruction, it's not a big deal for me.
And then we're gonna just go through these last couple ones. So an ECS based visual scripting. Again, this is kind of a lower priority one for me. I do think it would be cool to have some type of visual scripting for maybe rapid prototyping, or just people kind of getting some experience with ECS. But I don't know. This is kind of a weird one to me.
I think either visual scripting or hot reloadable burstable code. Either one I would be very glad with, because being able to change slight logic on the fly when you're working and when you're debugging your complex game mode code, like orchestrating code, that's very annoying when you need to reload all the time and
I agree.
recompile
Yeah,
it.
that would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you could do a very nice visual scripting solution for that, I would actually use that probably.
That makes
But
sense.
if
That
they
is a good
had,
use case for that.
yeah, but if they had a hot reloadable code, that would also make the thing work for me. Maybe there is a way, but I don't know if there is a way to do it bursted, so that's why I'm a little bit stuck on that.
And then, so I think that these last two are, yeah, these ones are the two most recently updated on this roadmap page. So there's parallel scheduling and configuration improvements. So this was posted November 2023, so just a couple months ago. So this is saying that right now in current versions of DOTS, all systems run on the main thread and rely on systems to schedule jobs in parallelism. And so they're looking to improve the out of the box parallelism, enabling systems to run in parallel, whether they schedule jobs or not. And then let's see if there's anything else in here. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing, is they want to, be able to have, because right now all systems just run on the main thread, but maybe you don't need to necessarily, maybe your data is like, completely separate. There's no dependencies between different systems, and you can just kind of run those systems on parallel threads by default. I definitely think that is kind of like an interesting idea, and I'm glad that that's a feature that they're kind of enabling. Because yeah, maybe even kind of going back to the example of like, talking about like Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, you could have systems for different rides or something, just kind of running on different threads, and because they don't need to necessarily worry about each other. What do you kind of think about this?
I think you can do some of this, I think, now, but it's a little bit more complicated. And I think you can do a lot of it if you go unsafe and you go on the open water and just hope you don't crash your computer. That's what I've done for my enemies, which are completely running parallel to everything.
And is that why you maybe had to overnight ship yourself a new computer?
No, that was I think that was a broken RAM module. But I'm not sure. I have the new computer and I don't really care what's wrong with the old one. But yeah, but so I think configuration improvements, like you could probably make a lot more options for how to schedule if you are very much in understanding of how your dependencies are gonna flatten themselves out onto different threads. But you can just, like, if you have 10 different enemies right now, and all of them use their own components and don't share any component type, you could just take all the enemy types and schedule all of them, and you would essentially have 10 different singular threads running each type of enemy in parallel, right? But that requires you to be on a knife edge with all the components and dependencies, because it's way stricter and way more requirements on everything than one might realize. So it takes some effort to get everything parallelized in that way. Maybe they will allow you to schedule things a little bit easier onto different threads, even though they might, I don't know, maybe they share a component, but you can still they share a component but they don't share an archetype, so you can still parallelize.
That's a good point. Yeah,
something like that. I don't know. But
just give people kind of
I think
more
it's a good thing that
management.
they're doing it. It's always fun to have something where you can just try different settings and see, throw a little bit of configurations at the wall and see what sticks and what goes fastest. So I think it's good.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, again, this one's kind of buried sort of at the bottom of this. So I don't know if this necessarily represents kind of the order of things that they're doing, but good to know that this one was recently updated. The other one that was recently updated is Entity's graphics performance improvements. So another thing they're looking at is support of dots deformation that provides, we're talking about dots deformations again, mesh deformation, pipeline that is performant and scalable, that works on any platform with GPU compute compatibility supported in dots. working on a better and more seamless integration into the engine and scriptable render pipelines. Next versions will also bring broader material support and URP support to URP support motion vectors. So yeah, I definitely think improvements to Entity's graphics are very much welcome. I know there's definitely a number of limitations with Entity's graphics right now, is something that I had kind of learned when I did a little bit of my animation performance testing, is that it turns out that pretty much all the solutions that I was using were basically limited by Entity's graphics. So yeah, it will be nice to see some performance improvements in there, and just kind of like, have some basic things like, because I don't think with mesh deformations that it supports like culling right now. So there's kind of some issues with that, and yeah.
Yeah, I would assume that the current situation we have is a little bit of like make it work with all the features that we need to be able to like be competitive with the engine. And maybe they are like, okay, let's back up a little bit, and how can we actually make this like very fine-tuned integration with the old stuff, maybe fine-tune new developments in the core ECS/burst tech, and integrate that with the graphics. And yeah, I bet there's a little bit of going back and forth between different parts of the engine, and like when you improve this part, maybe you can go back to this, and that can improve because of other stuff has become better. So maybe some of that is behind this, like, oh, it's time to go back to graphics and make sure that we can implement the new shiny things that we have done with the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe something like
so
that.
So many exciting talks that they're going to be talking about at GDC about all their new rendering tech. Be a little bit frustrating if we couldn't use that stuff just because we wanted to use dots and ECS basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's basically what the roadmap is looking like right now. And then do you just kind of want to open it up, if there's anything not on here that we can talk about, some kind of features that you would like to see kind of in the roadmap in general?
I have a very specific thing that I've been asking for 2.5 years, since we decided to make, now it's only me left, but we decided to make procedurally generated maps on my on just read instructions. And
Right.
dots, it's totally possible to do procedural generated content as my game works, and it procedural maps all the time, but it's not an easy sleek thing to do in dots, and partly because like baking is more for big cool maps that is like streamed in from subscenes. So basically V-rising, a super good use case for dots and subscenes.
Right.
But subscenes, for example, is completely irrelevant to me. I have no use for them really, as they are like, but they're a good idea. But I would like to have some sort of a way to just be able to work with content without having subscenes, which means that you would need to the asset manager
Like
thing
pretty much how it was before 1.0, right? Where we didn't necessarily have to use subscenes.
Not necessarily live conversion. I don't know what it would be, but some place where it's I shouldn't talk much more about this because I don't even really know how it should look. But right now
Sure.
it's not convenient. It's just totally possible, but not convenient because of how breaking and subscenes work, and it's very rigid in that sense. And I build so many custom stuff on top of that to make my stuff work. So yeah, I would like to have that. I don't know. Maybe I can talk to Danny
on that, like, with subscenes or, an alternative to subscenes, it would be nice because right now you can't do like any cross scene references. So you can't have any like direct references from things in your main scene to things in your sub scene. So, maybe, if there would be some way through an improvement to sub scenes, or again, using an alternative to sub scenes, like something like you had mentioned, that maybe we would be able to, reference things in, potentially other sub scenes, or the main scene, or just kind of things that exist. Again, if we are kind of going down this alternate path of using, not necessarily subscenes, just again being able to reference things in the main scene would be very nice.
Yeah. I think addressables have there's something going on there that might be good for that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. And then for me, I think again, some of the things that we had talked about, I definitely just want to see like improvements to some of the debugging tools and really just kind of like editor interface things in general, because there's still kind of a lot of frustrating things, just random errors that pop up for no reason, and it would be nice to get a lot of those things kind of ironed out, and again, just like a lot of little quality of life things, like sometimes when I'm typing in a field and I hit tab, it doesn't tab over to the next field. It just kind of goes literally nowhere. I'm like, I don't know what's happening with that. So it would be nice again to clean up some of those issues. One of the kind of random features that I would like to see is the ability to kind of distribute work over time a little bit better. So maybe if we had 10,000 entities and we want to be like running operations across all these entities constantly, but they don't necessarily need to be updating every single frame for every single entity. So it would be nice if Unity maybe provided us some kind of tooling that would allow us to kind of distribute work across the entities over time. So maybe you could operate on like one chunk on one frame, another chunk on the next frame, another chunk on the next frame, or kind of have a little bit of kind of configurability about how you can kind of break those things down a little bit, so you're not again iterating through all 10,000 entities every frame, but over the course of a couple seconds all the entities kind of do get updated, if that makes sense.
Maybe you thought about this, or maybe it hasn't been something you actually like gone at hard, but you could probably implement an iChunk job and then do modulo on the chunk index and do a little bit of that, but better tooling for that. I think that's a good point.
Exactly. It's not something that I've necessarily kind of had a need for, but it's more just like one of those things where I'm like, as I'm thinking about problems in, maybe like kind of the, Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 video that I just put up, like I was thinking of like, okay, all these guests, their stats are constantly kind of in flux, but they don't necessarily need to be, updating those every single frame. Like the player wouldn't notice the difference between all those stats being updated every single frame versus them being kind of updated periodically. And of course, there's different ways you could do this with like, timers, or, again, making your own implementation, like you were saying with the iJob chunk, kind of, incrementing that index. But again, I do think it would be nice to just have some, out of the box tools where you could like, ideally like literally just put like an attribute on a job or something like that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So anyways, those are kind of some of the things that we have as far as, that we would like to see from Dots coming up. Of course, feel free to leave any, suggestions and ideas that you have, A, in the comment section of this video, but B, you can also, I think, go on the roadmap and kind of submit, some things that you might want to see on here. I don't know if it's on here or if they just have you posting it in the forums or something like that. Anyways, there is a way that you can submit. I thought there was something on this page, right? Anyhow,
I don't know actually.
I do know. I think you can. Yeah, if you go into each of these things, like if if there's anything that you were interested in us talking about here today, you can go ahead and click on one of these and say, oh, this thing's not that important to me. This is nice to have. It's very important or critical. So you can go ahead and kind of like vote on there. And so from what I understand, this kind of helps them prioritize how they go ahead and roll out these different features. Okay, and so I just have a little demo here in Unity. This is just kind of the one that I had last week where I was showcasing the data-oriented damage system. I'm not going to be really showcasing too much inside Unity. We're going to be showing some things in the console here as kind of really the only thing. So what I'm going to be showing today is something that I made a video on a while ago, but I do just want to bring it up again because I think it is a nice feature. And this kind of goes a little bit into some of the things that I was just talking about kind of distributing work over time. But this is the concept of variable rate update groups. So what I'm doing here is creating a custom component system group. And you can create custom component systems groups, just like this, just by doing a public partial class, calling it whatever, and then inheriting from component system group. Now this allows you to group your systems into, different groups, kind of like organizing things within the player loop. So by default, the player loop has kind of three main groups. There's the initialization system group, the main simulation system group, and then finally the presentation system group. And then so within each of those, you can create your own sort of like subgroups. So if you had, say, a bunch of things related to a combat system, well, you could put those all in one group and then, add any systems related to that all to that one custom group. And then so everything kind of exists within that one group. And then so, you can now choose to order that group, where you want in the player loop, and then all those systems kind of move within that group. So anyways, this is just kind of like showing a group that has a variable update rate. The idea with having a variable update rate is you can basically say, I don't want these systems to update every single frame. I only want them to update once every 5 seconds. So in this case, the way that we would do that is just kind of in the constructor here. We can go ahead and set the rate manager variable here. And we can set this by creating a new variable rate manager just by using these rate utilities. And then we pass in an unsigned integer and a Boolean. So the unsigned integer is the time in milliseconds of how frequently you should update this. And it only goes a maximum of 1 time per frame. So if you said, update this at like 1 millisecond and then, your frame time is 16 milliseconds, it's not going to update 16 times. It's only going to update 1 time per frame. So anyways, if we want to do 5 seconds, we can type in 5,000 milliseconds. And then the Boolean is what we pass in is if the system basically needs access to the time property. So if we do want access to time, we can pass in true. And apparently there is a very minor performance gain if we pass in false. So it gives us the ability to set that if we want. So this again is just us defining this variable rate update group here. And then here we can just create any systems. You can be an I system or system base. And we just do our standard update in group, passing in the type of turbo update group, turbo rate update group is what I called it. And then so here is our kind of, important system. And then we have this inside the on update. We're going to say, updating important things at, and then just print out the elapsed time here. And then I can say have another system, which is the not important update rate. And then, this again does the same thing, but it just prints out a slightly different message and the time. So real quickly, I'll just come over here and go ahead and enter play mode. And so you can see inside the console, once every 5 seconds, it's going to go ahead and print out. You see it runs both these systems at the exact same time step. So if we pause this here, you see that these are happening, once every 5 seconds. So the first one happens at 5.4, the next one happens at 10.4, the next one is at 15.4. And you can see that both the systems are updating at the exact same time step because it's that full variable rate update group. All systems in that are going to be just called once at that one time. Now, one thing that I did just want to point out is from our systems here, we do have the ability to say set the rate manager just by getting reference to the system, the managed system, by targeting that particular update group. And then we can set the rate manager on that just by creating a new one here. So we can say set this to 1 second now. And then this isn't going to change it just for that one system. It's going to change it for basically the entire system group. So now, let me just make sure that's all good. Okay. So now you see that it's updating at 1 second intervals. And again, it's updating both systems because we're changing the rate management for that full update group. So this is kind of like a nice little tool to use that I just wanted to point out, where if you don't need things updating every single frame, we can update them on kind of a more periodic basis, which is kind of a cool thing to do. And again, I do think that it kind of tags off some of the things that I had mentioned about maybe distributing work over time. So this doesn't, quite get there, but it is still, the ability to, update things on kind of a more periodic basis. So Tobias, do you use any type of variable rate update groups in your game at all?
Yes, I use. I have several different solutions for several different problems. So first of all, my physics are inside of that the default fixed update group thing, so that's different than variable update.
Right.
But I think this is sort of supported in a later version, but I actually had to make my own version of this because I had a situation where I didn't want to update something more than 30 times a second, but I did not want any catch up. I just discard. If you don't have time to do it, it doesn't matter. Just discard it. And maximum. And so I had, I think this rate manager solution that Unity has going on is probably going to cover 99% of everything. And I think my solution is probably my problem is probably covered. It wasn't just when I programmed that 2.5 years ago. But there's a very, very interesting quirk with this, where I had to modify the source code of ECS to be able to handle a problem I had. So fixed rate, is one of those things where you can say it's supposed to be 30 times per second or 60 times per second, and it needs to sustain that even if you miss frames, right? So that's typical Unity, typical physics engine behavior in any engine, more or less. But I have a problem where I generate my level for the first 5 to 10 seconds, and that it takes all. I don't need to render anything. I just
right.
It takes it. I have 0.5 FPS basically for 10 seconds because of how it's set up and everything. And what happens for me is that it needs to run all of the frames for those 10 seconds, but it has a cap where it says you're not allowed to go more than 30 fixed update catch-up frames per every normal frame, render frame. So that means that if you get behind, super behind, so I think 10 or 30 is the maximum. If you get super behind, and it's we've rendered basically 10, we have 10 seconds of played game, and we need to have 600 physics update during those 10 seconds because 60 per second, then it needs to catch up all of those 600 frames, which in my situations turns out that it makes the whole game run the physics in uber speed for 5 seconds after to catch up that. And I had a bug for a while and I didn't realize exactly what it was, and it was just for 5-10 seconds.
I'm sure that was a hard one to track down.
Yeah, I was what the hell, what is going on? So yeah, and there is no way to skip this, to make it just discard a bunch of frames. It needs to go through all of those 600 frames, even if it's doesn't at all fit in the situation in the game. So what I had to do, and I can share my screen here and show off that a little bit if you want to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you got it ready and open.
Yeah, I do have it right here. There you go. Yeah, you were before me.
Gotcha.
So here we have the fixed rate catch-up manager, and the catch-up thing here, that's the problem that we are concerned with, that it wants to catch up if you're behind, right? And here we have the fixed step simulation system group, long word, but that's where the physics is run 60 times a second. So if we go into this so now we're looking at the ECS source code, right? This function here takes like the target delta time that we're aiming for to basically, this is 1 through 60 for 60 FPS, right? 1 over 60, that's the way you say that mathematical thing.
I get you.
This one do not exist, I don't think. So what happens is that we create and we get these 600 frames, and there's like this last fixed update, which basically keeps track of how far are you away from the actual frame that you want to like. Oh, we're 6 seconds behind. Then this last fixed update time will like keep track of that delta, and that's makes it like go have to go through all of those 600 frames or whatever. And it's a private one. Well, it's not even specified, but default private one, which means that there's no way for me to skip those 600 frames of physics updates. So I had to add this constructor, which takes in an elapsed time, which says that basically we're not back there anymore. We're here. We're 10 seconds in the future. And all those 600 frames in between then and now, just skip them.
Don't worry
Doesn't
about
matter.
Yeah.
So that means that if I go to my this right here and we take it the path, look at the path, my physics, my entity's source code is inside of my packages and not inside of libraries and the package cache where you can't change anything. And I had to move this out and be able to, and so I can modify the source code and put this in to be able to handle that. If anybody person who have seen this have another solution where I don't have to modify the source code to fix this problem, I would love to hear another solution because this is the only way I figured out. I have several other modifications to the ECS source code, so it's fine. But every modification is annoying because upgrading makes you have to go through all your modification and write them in the new version also. Which it's just So the rate manager thing, very good solution. Not having a possibility to skip frames, not so brilliant. But good thing that we have source access and can just write the thing that we need.
Yeah, no, it is super helpful, and it seems like a good enough solution.
I just remember I can just point out how it looks in practice. So I have a thing here where first I just come into the scene, and before I start updating everything, I just enable them and ran both of them. This is my own thing. Run them once just to make sure everything is up and running, and then I disable them, and then between this update fixed rate system and then start fixed rate system, my whole level generation is executed. And then when you're all right, let's go, then I call these guys, and that's where I put in the elapsed time into this my own constructor here, and then turn them on. And if I take that one away, it's I will have 5 seconds of ultra fast physics speed in the beginning of every game, which is very, very annoying. So that's practically how it works.
Nice. And actually, if you just go back to the rate utils class real quick, it showcases on line 178 my favorite type name in all of Unity ECS, the irate manager.
Oh, irate manager.
Do you get it?
Am I no? Irate manager?
So the term irate is like it basically means like extremely angry. Like if you're irate, you're like extremely angry.
Oh, I consider myself pretty good at English, even though it's not my first language. But I've never heard about that expression. I thought you were gonna like make something aerate, like put air into it.
Irate. No. It's just straight up irate manager.
Yeah. So very angry manager then.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that was my weird quirk that I had to fix in my game to make it better. or solve my issue.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. And yeah, I guess we'll just continue sharing your screen here because you're taking over the instruction set for the week where you're talking about singletons in Unity ECS. So yeah, feel free to get this going and let's see what this is all about.
Yeah, so singletons. I mean, like I said in the beginning of the stream, like this is since the beginning of time. I made my first singletons in C++ back in 2008 maybe, and that was a completely different thing than singleton is in C# generally speaking,
Yeah,
at least in mono behaviors. In C# managed land.
sure. Yeah.
But so. So let's just quickly let's think about and before I show anything, let's think about what I mean with singleton. So a global place to have a specific set of data that you should only have one of them. It's not that like it only needs to be one. No, it needs to. It cannot be two. That's a bad idea, and then it's not a singleton. And it should be basically globally accessed. But the globally accessed part is a little bit irrelevant because data-oriented design, generally speaking, is like nobody cares about encapsulation as in object as you do in object-oriented type of programming.
Right.
So in object in old school game object Unity, you will have like some class static accessors and tricks to be able to have like I can get this singleton wherever I am in the whole game, and it's not encapsulated into behind anything really. It's just like straight up, and you can just access it. That part of it just automatically by default, sort of in data-oriented design, it should be just accessed globally, like everything else in data-oriented design. But keeping it one globally and keeping it effective. That's the two things I was concerned about when I started thinking about this problem back in maybe 2019 or something. So the first thing, let's just take a look at one thing here. So I've just mocked up a few things here. So we have three different iComponent datas with some random data inside. You can imagine this being some global constant data loaded in from somewhere, and then we have some game mode state which may change during the game or whatever. And normally you would do something like this, right? At least in Unity 1.0 and forward, you would use this nice and dandy create singleton thing that comes with the entity manager in the source code of ECS.
Right.
And like I think this is a good thing, but I'm a little bit confused why they haven't like made it so you can target a single entity. Because what happens in the background here, if we go to it, is that this it creates an entity with the
Right.
specific archetype. So just an entity with just a single component on it. So if we were to run this, let's see if I can get everything up and running. We can just have it paused and we take a look. We'll see here that this code generated these three. So it's nice that they have automatically put the name of the component, of the singleton component. So that makes it like easier from inspection in this hierarchy type of thing. So if we look at this, we have the game mode state, we have the two big matrices, and we have our other things. So that's three different things. But there's one chunk, or at least one chunk per archetype, and these are three different archetypes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the chunk is 16 kilobyte, I think.
Correct. Yes.
So we have 3 times 16 kilobytes for these three things.
Yeah.
And this is not 16 kilobytes. That's way less.
No, I think that's like 128 bytes.
Something like that. Yeah, it's very a lot, very small. And maybe also this is developing, this API or this function didn't exist before 1.0, I don't think. So it might be, Unity are making my solution, which I'm about to show, us slightly obsolete soon. I don't know. This is the way I solved it. So instead of using that, I have this thing, singleton utilities, I call it. And this code is through the thing. Never mind. We can talk about that later.
Okay.
If we go here, we can take a look at what I've written. So I have a static class which is basically all extension methods on the entity manager.
Right.
So I just want to have it access through the entity manager straight up. Even this one, which technically doesn't even use entity manager, I still just have it through the entity manager, so I have it all from the same one. In the setup here, if we ignore this, making sure we not already have a singleton setup, it just creates straight up an entity and it puts one single tag component onto it. And then I just use these guys, create or set and create or add. So what I do is that I have this static entity, which is one for the whole game, right? And when I go in here and I'm like, I want my specific singleton right now, I want to create this thing.
Yeah.
I send it we can look at this from the other side, actually, it's easier. So create or add or create or set. And this basically means that if it's already existing, it will overwrite it. That's why it says or. And add means that you don't have to set anything. And set means that I need to put in like an instance of the actual component
Sure.
to it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just like default data,
yeah.
000 or whatever. So when we go here, it just wrong button on my keyboard. Let's see. There we go. I'm getting used to the mic in front of me.
Oh yeah.
So create or add. This was the wrong. Yeah. So this one, since it's add, it doesn't set anything. If we already have it, it doesn't even do anything. If we do using the create or set, then it's like if we have it, we set it. If we don't have it, we add it with the data. So, basic stuff. And we always use this singleton entity thing. So that means, let's see here. If we go back with this code now instead, we compile with that. So now we have the other thing, the other code enabled. So now we don't have this nicely named, but that could probably be solved if one wanted to do that. We have this entity instead. And if we look at that, we have the default singleton tag, and then we have all of the three ones. So this means that all of these share the same 16 kilobyte chunk, which is,
Yeah, that's
16,
awesome.
Yeah.
That's a ton of data.
In the context of your CPU, so 16 kilobytes is not a big deal, but it's a big deal on the inner cache. That's where it's annoying to have 16 kilobytes unused, right? Because the other part of the chunk will be completely unused. And if you have, let's say, a modest 20 singleton component, that will quickly stack up. A lot of 16 kilobyte chunks, basically empty, just stacking up. If you have 20, I think I have about 50 singleton components in mine. So I might be actually running out of the 16 kilobyte chunk space at one point. Who knows?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. I would be curious about an in production
what size
singleton,
of it?
What size you're at and how much overhead you still have.
Yeah, and just side note, if I run into that, I have already thought about that issue, and there's some slight categorization lens to view my singleton through, where I get two different categories of singletons, one with constant data and one with I have blob assets for most of my constant data, but some are not, and I can just put that constant data singletons on its own thing, and then have all the variable singletons on the other on so I can split it into two singletons. But also one could probably just Google this quickly if one wanted to, but maybe Unity already solved this if that would be an issue. I know it wasn't solved originally because Stanlock ran into this issue with super huge components, which wouldn't fit into a single chunk. But maybe that's solved, so this will just automatically just continue working if I break the 16 kilobyte barrier. Anyway, back to the examples here. So this looks much better, right? So so this means a few things, which is very nice. So we can take the first thing, which is kind of annoying, and then we take all the nice things. So one thing here, for some people who haven't worked a lot with dots, maybe this is very strange and you haven't seen this, but we have an API call which allows you to get the singleton and get the actual source data behind it.
Right.
So you can modify it. Otherwise, if you just get the singleton like this one, you will get a copy of this specific singleton component. And changing that won't change anything. It would just change this local copy of it. But this one, you can do read-write value. And if you write like that, the actual source data will change. But that's only through get singleton, this generated code. I have tried to replicate it, but I haven't figured it out yet how to replicate this with my own singleton. But that means that we're basically doing looking up through queries and everything, finding your exact singleton like old school, the normal style, just to find one data component and having read-write access to it. Just for this RV version of it, you'll have to go back to normal system API calls. But if you are just reading constant data, you don't have to use this type. You can do like this, entity manager get singleton, have your own overloaded version, which just gets the data without doing a query to find which chunk you're at, because you already have one global static entity.
Which so you already know, basically. Yeah,
I already know, and I don't think queries are at all performance issues, but there is something going on behind a query, so doing this got to be slightly faster. Yeah, and also this is not burstable. I think there's a way to do this burstable, but static variables like this are simply not burstable for race condition, basically parallel thread problem thing. That's not necessarily burst, but it's still like tied into the whole bundling up the code into a perfect, nice, neat package and executing it bursted. And static, there's something called shared static, which might be possible to use that. I've experimented, but I have zero performance issues with this, and I have very few cases where I would need to, where I care about this problem. But if you're not bursted, you can use you can just use it like this, and you will get probably the result slightly faster. So that's one nice thing. The other do you have any?
No, this is awesome.
Yeah. The other very, very nice thing, which is way, way more like just convenience thing than anything, is so if we go back to this thing, and I have a little bit of a print statement somewhere. Yeah, this one. Global game mode states global data and global data 2 is not on the same entity. So if we go where this is coming from, it's coming from a burst system, this one. So imagine you're having game mode code, which obviously you execute like globally for all players or whatever, if this is a multiplayer game, or for all enemies or something. But it's just one it's a singleton logic, sort of. Then imagine all of these three being on separate entities. Then you will need to do the query for the game mode states, which you might want to change, and then inside of here you can pick out the two singletons, but you still need to pick out these two data manually, right? And we can ignore that one. That's just for my logging to be more clean. So you can see you can't do a single clean for each loop on a single chunk to be able to access all of the data you need. You need to like, oh, this singleton over here in that chunk and that over there, and you need to gather it up, and then you can run your singleton logic for your game mode or whatever here. But if you actually go back to this solution where you put everything on the same one, maybe you already see where I'm heading with this. And let's see if I can reload it. Game mode state, global data, and global data 2 is on the same entity. And we can look, we looked at this before, straight up same entity, which means that the code can look like this instead. So you just query for everything you need, which in a game mode type of logic is often just singletons. Maybe it's like a list of all the positions of the enemies or something, if you, or something like that. But it's generally speaking like a singular orchestrating code that just does a bunch of things with all sorts of items and
Right. So
things
instead
around the
of
map.
having to look for all the different singleton entities, you're just going to that one single singleton. And then
which has
just getting all the data
all of
off
them.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is all my game mode code in just read instruction comes through a single update loop like this, where it just runs once with all the singletons nicely packed into a single chunk and nicely updated.
Nice.
So this is actually, I think that's the most underrated. That's the most useful part about shoving this together. It's not performance. It's just convenience. It just looks much cleaner to do it that way, and you will have write access to all of this. You know, if you do the write, whatever it's called,
ref RW.
Right, yeah. But or if you do it through other type of iteration methods like the jobs or the old school entities for each, all of these, you know, you can just have straight up an update which takes care of the whole thing, and it's all nicely packed in memory. So yeah, those are the nice things about how it turns out to have this single entity singleton. Let's look at a few other examples of things that is like not necessarily different, but to think about. Let's see here. What do I have changed here? There we go. So reading from so this is general. This works mostly the same in if you have the single entity singleton, or if you have the other one where it scatters them around. But I just wanted to show some examples of how it looks to read from this singleton. So imagine we're going through transforms. Maybe this is the player loop. We're doing something somewhere. Normally, you just read the values. You have to pull it out in a local variable like that, and then you can read it straight into run, and that, you know, doesn't change anything when either way you use it. And with this type of a read, you can do it super parallelized, doesn't matter. So here we have the same thing, schedule parallel. All of this will just be totally fine, right? So and this is just mock-up logic. There doesn't do anything. It's just like some if statement to have something. Then we have this thing also. So if you have the singleton again, and again, this is more generalized thoughts around singleton. If you have this read-write version of it, imagine you're writing something. Oh, the last time a player was killed or something. It's a global variable that you need to look through all the players to find out and then shove it back. If you have it in a run, then you can use this read-write version of it. You see, we get the read-write value, and because it's a run single-threaded on the main thread, we can write directly to this one without any problems. And that didn't exist when I started, the read-write version. So make sure if you're using singletons, and a lot of game mode code, if not all, should be main thread run, maybe schedule, but probably run, because it will probably not be heavy stuff going on there, so it can just make sure it's bursted, and then you can have this thing, and this is for every player maybe, or something like that. So it's not necessarily the single logic executing for the game mode. It may be logic executing for all enemies, or for all object, or for all players, but you can still have read and write access to a singleton inside of it and make your code cleaner.
Yeah, no, that's great, because if you didn't have that, then you would have to do a get singleton, modify the data, and then do a set singleton.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that I've definitely done in some of my recent tutorials. I'm thinking of if I did that in the netcode for entities one or not. I know that I for sure didn't use the get singleton RW, but I don't remember if I'm doing any singleton actually setting in there.
These kind of API upgrades are very nice and very annoying at the same time, because you like, oh, I have 500 times I do this in the old way,
right.
code, and it's just in my body to think about not swapping all of them out for the right proper one.
God, so just spend a weekend changing all my get singletons over to
I already spend so much time on exactly that type of issue, because I can't stand my own code when it's doing something very unnecessary. So one day my game should come out also. So that's a balance you have to make.
Right.
V-Rising was launched on version 0.17 for that reason. They're like, nah, screw it.
A heavily modified 0.17.
Oh, yeah, heavily modified. Yeah, that's for sure. Then, so let's take a look at the weird edge case here, just because of this singleton paradigm situation.
Cool, yeah.
So if we uncomment this, so this is actually a callback to my quick tip for 2 weeks ago, where I pointed out a problem with structural changes and having to pull out another copy, or another the dynamic buffer once again to make sure, and you can go back to that to see how I solved that, but this is a slightly different situation which doesn't have a neat solution really. So here I pull this out, I do some stuff with it, who knows what, and then I do something which is explicitly a structural change. So this just means that if I have the component, I remove it, and if I don't have it, I add it again. So it just flips just to make sure something technically structural changed have happened here. And then we use the same global data RV that we picked out here. We try to use the same to use that one, to try to push in some new value. And if I run this, let's hope, ignore these ones and just focus on this. Attempted to access this global data, which has been invalidated by a structural change. So that means that this thing made this singleton reference, if you want to call it, invalid. And there's a ways to work around this. There's several ways, but the easiest way I've noticed is just pull it out again. Don't muck about, just like, it's probably the same, probably not a very nice cache hit at the same memory location, but just do what the memory safety wants you to do and just pull it out again. All right, it's fair. Other ways to solve this would be to have a copy, not the reference to it, and then write to it through a component lookup thing. But like, this is almost simpler. It's just a little bit annoying to have to write the same line.
Yeah, it probably
another
resets
one.
The safety checks or something. And...
Yeah. And I think also there's like 99.999% chance this has not changed through that thing. But it can actually swap chunk. So you move it literally to another part of memory, and that might actually make this reference completely invalid. So You know what? Forget about the last thing. I actually think that this might actually screw it up. Anyway, that's it for that one. I have one more thing to show you, to show that's probably relevant. for most people who just haven't used singletons as much. So first of all, we can, if we uncomment this, we see what's going on. So here we have basically the same code as before. We just write some random stuff into singleton. Either of this, I don't know, maybe they compile, actually. That could be the case, that they are compiling. I don't remember. But I think they both get the same. Yeah. Schedule this job uses unsafe pointer, which is not allowed. So behind the scenes in the singleton reference, you have an unsafe pointer to the actual place where the data is. And they're like, if you're gonna schedule something, it can't be pointing out away from the job, and you need to have a contained local copies of everything. So if you have a pointer which points out of the
right, because multiple locations could be modifying that data, basically.
This everything you put into this lambda expression here, or any type of job like that in the job system, it sort of captures it and with local copies. And if you have a way out through a memory address, then you can get out of your little safe box, and that's basically what Unity job system prevents you and makes very nice and tidy for you. So you're in this job box, and everything is just, unless it's native arrays, native collections, you can't get out of it. But with native collections, then they have all this dependency tracking built into it, so they are able to communicate in and out, right? Otherwise, but this global singleton reference points out, and the safety system just, no, you can't have a way out of the little safe box. So you get this unsafe pointer are not allowed. Maybe there's a way around this in schedule, because technically schedule, is one thread. So maybe that one thread could have access to this single singleton thing, but I don't think so. I have not found it, but I'm unsure. In schedule parallel, it definitely, this is like the clearest race condition you can imagine. It's like just 50,000 threads shoving their own values randomly into the same thing, and they will just no. This will instantly give you race conditions all over the place. So yeah, that's how you cannot write to this one in parallel in any way. That's what the safety system is for. But remember, you can write to it. You can read from it very easily. Schedule parallel, reading from it, because this is a copy and does not have a pointer out to the actual value. It's just a copy.
Nice.
And then, questions, or is it clear?
No, I think I'm set for now. Yeah, that's good.
So I have one more last thing, because like, if you never worked in parallel situations before, dot sort of gives you a nice way of getting onto it, and you can try to just parallelize a bunch of entities, and it just works, sort of, right? But it working on the actual entity that you're going through, right? So communicating out of a parallelized job, which you do a lot of with singletons. You need to like communicate out something, a singular point, like, oh, some enemy went and did this, and you need to have global knowledge about that one entity went over the edge, or whatever. One enemy went over the edge, and you need to know that. So how would you do that? So here we have a write job, and it's named correct because it's actually works, and it's a good way of doing it. So imagine here you're going through all local transforms, and you shove something in, some data. This is again the copy, a singleton data, and you have like, oh, if he's too high up, then we need to know about it, right? The only really way to do this serialized, parallelized, is to have a parallel writer. So I think native queue is the best one, and this is a huge subject to talk about the different types of how different collection works, but this is just an example how it could work. So native queue by default is not thread safe, but you have this sub substructure parallel writer, which only lets you write to it. And then you can just, oh, somebody went out. It doesn't really matter. But by just the fact that we're putting something into this native queue, the next frame later then, so let me just point out how this goes. So when I set up the right job here with my data, which is my native queue, this is the one I'm writing to. And then, so this is the same, right? And then in the beginning of the next frame, then I can just check, like, is the count of data not 0? Then something happened inside of that job. So that's like the main way you can communicate a single global event through parallelized code. You need to let all the different threads or different cores or whatever have a way to like thread safely just put their result into a queue that handles all of them shoving at the same time, which this parallel writer does. So that's a very, very straightforward way of communicating out. You will have, a full buffer of stuff coming out from all of the different parallel threads doing their thing. But that's the thing that you then sort through in single thread mode afterwards. But hopefully all of the different threads have, did as much processing as they can and then hand this off to the singleton type of code that's gonna zip through it and make sure that, oh right, there's some enemy just went outside of the map in the Y direction, let's handle that. But that's, so yeah, and that's once again like singleton type of managing data,
Right, yeah.
and how that works with parallelized.
That kind of is similar to a little bit about what we were talking about last week with the damage system, about how you can kind of like, queue things up from parallel threads or, different jobs and everything like that. And then at one point in the frame, you kind of, go through all that data and then actually apply it where you need it.
Yeah. And I have one last example here of a problematic, and it's not, this compiles and runs just fine. But it's to point out how you can be tricked by this, especially with some built-in nice things from Unity that doesn't really work as you want them to sometime. So here we have basically the same situation here, but instead of communicating out through a native queue and just like having like, is there anything in the native queue, and have that as the signal, we are trying to update the global singleton data and say like, oh, enemy went out, and we need to detect that in the singleton data or singleton state or whatever you want to call it. So we have this if statement here, and then somebody went over and we set this value, and then we use this parallelized command buffer, which delayed writes directly to the singleton data. So I have this, I set up, so I have the entity that actually holds the singleton data. I have that here, and then I have the command buffer, and I set this new set data onto that command buffer, and then later in the frame, when we're not parallelized anymore, the Unity will, the ECS code will execute this command buffer, and it will set this global data onto the actual singleton that we have in our data set, which, nice, we detected. Value 2 is 4. We know that enemy is above the value or whatever. However, in this case, this sort of becomes a little bit weird, because you can have 10 different enemies doing this.
Right, I was gonna say, yeah.
And you don't know how many, and they're all gonna, run in different. You still sort on this entity indexing queries. You still have a sorting thing, which makes this command buffer apply the changes in a predictable manner. But it's just predictable. It's not determined in a way that you might expect. So this is just a bad habit. It will work. It will probably do what you expect it to most of the time, but it will have like a hidden race condition. So because you can have 10 changes to this singleton data that's just executed, and all of them will just overwrite the other one just in a long line.
Right. Yeah. It's just like whichever one was the last one is the one that basically gets applied.
Yeah. With this one, you still keep like separate elements in a queue for every time this thing happens. You can count them up afterwards. In this case, you can't count anything up afterwards, and like that's just because that's how command buffers works. They are not very good to communicate out singleton types of data out of a parallelized job.
Right.
Maybe very esoteric specific situation, but I've dealt with this problem a few times, and so I wanted to show off how I solved it.
Yeah. No, that's great that you mentioned that. And by the way, I'm sure Danny is probably shouting at his screen right now for you using entity index and query. The one that you should be using, I believe, is chunk index in query.
Oh, maybe actually for the sort key in that's probably right.
The reason being is because if you calculate, because like the entity index, no, not even entity index in chunk, it's chunk index in query. So each chunk basically gets a unique index, because all you need is a unique index so it knows kind of the general order to play them back in.
Yeah.
So if you do entity index in query, it actually has to calculate the entity index for every entity, which has a little bit of overhead with it.
Yeah.
And so if you use chunk index in query, then whatever chunk that you're in, it just already has that chunk index.
That makes sense. Because like this index here, it just doesn't really matter what it is. It's just supposed to be predictable.
Exactly.
And so you don't really need to care exactly what it is. And this is much faster to calculate than the other one. I've actually used the wrong one in a different situation, had a huge amount of issues with this index because there's 3 of them to choose, and I chose the wrong one, and all of them are like the exact same length and contains like 80% the same words.
Exactly. So if you're just at a quick glance, it's just like, oh, that looks fine. Yeah.
So but good catch. And lastly, there's 2 slight pitfalls. They aren't really pitfalls, they're just something to be aware of. First of all, remember, this is a specific, if I set this up the very first entity in the world, so I know that it's like entity 0 or whatever, 01 I think it's called. So that means that when I have a situation where I can debug my client server communication with multiple worlds in the same editor, and it all works because it's just the same entity index on both worlds, but it's technically 2 different worlds using the same singleton entity. So be aware of that. If you have multiple worlds, this will not work unless you're very, very sure that they end up having the same index in both of the worlds.
Interesting.
I think there's a way to do this pretty cleverly and make it like have a list of like, oh, for this world, this is the singleton entity, and for this world, this is the. But that would probably
kind of like
mean
how you can assign like the default game object injection world.
Yeah,
like a
something like
world.
that.
Yeah.
But I think any solution to that multiple worlds problem will probably take away a little bit from the performance gains of it, because then instead of doing query stuff, you do some sort of lookup in a table to find whatever world you're in and so for me it's just easier to create this singleton entity the first thing you do in the world and make sure that's the same, and then I just don't care which world you are on.
All right, hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah. Use on your own with caution.
Yeah.
And then the last one, remove singleton component if exists. This isn't really like a problem or anything. It's just that this is remember to remove the component, not delete the entity. I've made that problem a few times where I was like, oh,
where's all my data go?
And also like this is generally just a nice extension method to have, where you can like where you can just remove stuff if it exists and don't do anything if it doesn't exist, and have like a slightly silent failure. It's not a failure, a silent like skip. I don't think, maybe there's something in the newer versions of ECS that does this.
Yeah,
But for
I don't
me,
think you need to have the has component check.
I had a lot of issue. I have a lot of like warnings and stuff going all over the place when I.
Yeah. But I mean, you have it in place, so it's like no
Yeah.
need to. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, and also you can do the same with singleton buffers. Exactly the same solution, and try all of these things that you normally would do with the singleton in normal system API. Most of them can be replicated easily with this singleton entity thing. So just go ham with that and try to find something that fits easily in your type of coding. Yeah, and just for fun, this was my attempt earlier today to replicate the RV thing. This is what singleton RV looks like behind, with a bunch of safety added that I've removed. But it appears that this one is internal, so I would need to modify that and make it public. And this index in archetype, it's more or less impossible to get unless you're using a query, which this one is supposed to avoid. So I don't really know how, if I could make the singleton RV work, but you can just go into the code, find the thing that you want to sort of have, but slightly different way, and just copy it in and try to make it work. The source code is just straight up there. Yeah.
Sweet.
That was it, I think. That's how I manage singleton in my game.
Awesome.
I have
that is
100,000 lines of code in my game, and everything is based on, every singleton decision, the code is based on this pattern. So
That's
I guess
awesome.
that works.
Yeah, this is an excellent solution. I really like you have the good memory savings, and I think you're taking into account a lot of the job dependencies and everything. And yeah, this is something that I would certainly like to use in some of my own projects, because yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. Just store that stuff all within the same chunk. There's no reason to break it up and just have all that empty chunk data.
There is one annoying thing with this. When you select the singleton in a mid-game situation in my game, and you want to see all the inspector view of it, it lags. It takes like 2-3 seconds for it to load in all of the different things. I don't know. It lags certainly more than a normal entity, because
You
it
have to
just
load in
have
like a couple
all the different
kilobytes of data.
Yeah, but it should be only be one chunk. So I think the inspector thing is doing a lot of fancy trickery around to make
all
some
the
UI
property
thing.
drawers and everything.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually the data. I think it's more about the debug systems
sense.
around it that really doesn't like my gigantic entity.
Cool. Well, that sounds great to me. Thank you very much for sharing. So this is normally the section of the video where we would do a Q&A, opening up any questions to the audience. But again, like I mentioned earlier, we're not actually live right now. This is pre-recorded, but I am hanging out in the chat. So hopefully if you've been asking any questions, I've been able to address them in the chat. Otherwise, feel free to leave them in the chat or in the comment section of this video. And then next week, Tobias is going to be on, and we can have like maybe a little section about going over some of your questions related to this. Again, I do think this is a really cool setup, and thanks again for sharing it. But yeah, so we're just kind of at our end segment here, so we can go ahead and just start wrapping things up here. So we'll go into our dynamic allocation. So this is the fun things that we have to share with the community. And I have both of our dynamic allocations up here, so I can go ahead and do this. But why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what your dynamic allocation of the week is?
Yeah, so I can actually do that. Not that it's...
I stole it from you, but...
You stole it from me. Oh,
yeah.
Is that your screen? Yeah, it's your screen.
Yeah.
It's just the first really, really good talk on a lot of burst in-depth details. These are the... Oh.
Oops.
No problem. So just I think the best one... I think Mike Acton has one also that is very good, but I think this might be the creme de la creme of
burst talks, and it's back in 2019. So a lot of the stuff he talks about here, where he like, oh, this is what we're doing with burst, and we have all these things which we are trying to do, and here you have a preview of how it's gonna look. All of that stuff is in burst at the moment, so I don't think there's anything in this talk that's not already stable at this point. But there's just a lot of just food for thought around how to deal with high performance code in this talk that I really like. And just throw back to like fast float arithmetic burst and me like going in down the rabbit hole with the intrinsics to try to optimize my code. He talks a lot about different intrinsics here, and I think if you have the big brain he got, you can probably get a lot of gains. But even though this is very, very interesting, there's some things which I've noticed that, yeah, this is cool stuff, but the burst compiler already does it better than I can when I try to do manual things. Like, you know, oh, this if statement will be true more times than false, and then you can say like on this architecture you can give it a hint, and the pre, it's something called which executes code in forward that's coming up and like being very predictive about the code, and that's supposed to be use your hint to be able to be more. And
right,
I tried
you can
that.
Say if this is a likely or unlikely case or whatever.
Yeah, branch predictor, that's what's it called. You can give hints to the branch predictor, and I tried that with the stuff that I really much know which one the percentages of the if statement, and it did zero difference. So I think there's probably good things to use with it, but it wasn't in my case anyway. But that's like maybe 10% of this talk, so you should watch it. It's super good.
Cool. Yeah, I can't remember if I've seen this one or not. It's been out for a couple of years, so regardless, I will definitely revisit this one because there's so much interesting things you can do with burst.
Yeah.
Okay, so my dynamic allocation of the week, I wanted to give a shout out to WAYN Games. You may have seen this name in the Turbo Misc Games Discord or even in the chat of a bunch of the live streams that we do. He also is a content creator who does a lot of Unity dot stuff, and he's been getting back into making videos pretty regularly here. And so he's been kind of putting on some of these masterclass things. I need to catch up on these here. I did see this interesting one, which was exploring complex entity interaction patterns in Unity dots. This one was really cool because it actually kind of lined up with some of the things that I'm doing related to like the combat system that I've been sharing in the previous week's Hot Path show, and I'll be getting back into it in the next week's one. But this is kind of talking about, different ways of interacting between large groups of entities and large groups of entities if, they're kind of like damaging them. There's kind of this system that I believe someone in the Unity forums had kind of initially created. And it is kind of like you can select between different implementations of these systems to kind of compare performance of, applying damage from many entities to many entities. And WAYN Games kind of expanded on that and added some of its own things and then kind of did some performance comparisons that way. So that was an interesting one. And then he has kind of some more of these dots master classes where he's going a little bit more into depth on things. And so it's all definitely good content. If you are interested in learning more about dots and ECS, I would highly recommend checking out WAYN Games.
I watched a few of his things. Very nice.
Yeah. He's got some good stuff for sure.
His digital avatar that he uses on the side is a little bit that's new for me. I'm not in that world too much. That was strange to me, but he has very good content. So
I saw in his recent one he actually had his face on here. So
maybe I'll get back into it. Not that it hindered me anything before, but it was a little bit funny to me. I guess
it's kind of cool.
He's very knowledgeable about that. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's very active in the forums as well. So lots of good stuff there. Okay, so anyways, we can go ahead and get this video wrapped up here, just go ahead and real quickly thank our Patreon supporters. Go ahead and especially thank the top tier Patreon supporters. Right now, eCool is at the top tier support, so thank you very much for your support over there. Once again, feel free to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/turbomakesgames. Again, I just put out a video yesterday as when this goes live about how I would make Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 using Unity dots. Definitely a very fun video, and hope you all enjoy it and have a bunch of other cool relevant perks and stuff coming up. So anyways, that is it for episode 5 of the Hot Path Show. Thought it was a really great one. Thanks for joining me in here, Tobias. You got any closing parting words as we head out here?
No, I'm glad I got to share my Singleton thing. It's stuff on my computer that I'm like, maybe somebody can use this more than me. It would be nice.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool, and I hope everyone in the audience finds it cool as well. So, yeah, by the way, glad that you got your computer set up very, very last minute and were able to, have some.
It still doesn't have any side panels on it.
Yeah. Just all, yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, with that, we can go ahead and wrap up this episode. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Take care, and we'll see you next week for Hot Path Show. It'll be me and Tobias, and I'll be kind of going into the second part of my combat system. So anyways, we'll catch you then.